The day had begun like any other, emails to answer, files to sort, and the steady hum of the office filling the space around me. I had grown used to the rhythm of the workplace, the predictable cadence of meetings and deadlines, the polite but distant interactions with colleagues. And then she appeared in the doorway, my boss. She was in her early 40s, composed and confident, every movement measured yet graceful. Stood there, a faint smile playing on her lips. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment the world narrowed to the space between us. There was an intensity there, quiet but unmistakable, the kind that makes your pulse skip before you even understand why. "Could you stay a little late today?" she asked. Her tone was casual, but there was a weight to it, an unspoken invitation that made me hesitate. "I have a meeting, and I need it to be uninterrupted." Her words lingered, the air around her thick with subtle intent. She closed the office door behind her. Then, in a gesture that caught me off guard, pulled the curtains halfway, dimming the fluorescent glare of the office lights. The room transformed instantly. Suddenly it was warm, intimate, cocooned in the soft shadows of the fading afternoon. As I stepped in, my senses tuned to every detail. The faint, comforting scent of her perfume lingered in the air, mingling with the smell of paper and coffee, making the office feel strangely personal, almost private. The way her blouse caught the light as she moved, the gentle swish of fabric brushing against her wrist. It was mundane, yet intimate in a way that made my chest tighten. She gestured for me to take a seat across from her desk, and I noticed how the space seemed to shrink, the distance between us charged with unspoken possibilities. I tried to focus on the folder she handed me, the rustle of the papers under my fingers grounding me, but I couldn't ignore the warmth radiating from her as she leaned slightly forward. Her gaze lingered, steady and unflinching, as if she were assessing more than just the work in front of her. Every small movement, the tilt of her head, the way she adjusted her chair, the slow, deliberate closing of the blinds, felt magnified, intimate. My mind raced with questions, but there was a magnetic pull in the quiet, a tension that didn't belong to professional boundaries alone. I reminded myself to breathe, to focus on the purpose of the meeting, yet my heartbeat betrayed me. There was something different about this, something electric in the stillness, something quietly personal that I had not expected from the usual formality of office life. And as she gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile, I realized that whatever this meeting would be, it was already unforgettable. In that moment, the ordinary predictability of the office fell away, replaced by a charged anticipation, a delicate mix of nervousness and curiosity. I didn't know exactly what she had planned, but I knew one thing. This evening, this private space with her, would linger in my mind far longer than any report, any task, or any ordinary workday ever could. The office had transformed into a world of muted shadows and soft light. With the curtains drawn, the harsh glare of the afternoon sun no longer intruded, leaving the room bathed in a warm, golden hue. It was quiet, so quiet that every small sound, every subtle movement, seemed amplified. The click of her pen against the desk, the soft rustle of papers, even the faint hum of the air conditioner carried an unexpected intimacy. She gestured for me to sit opposite her, and I obeyed, acutely aware of the space between us shrinking with each passing second. The air felt heavier somehow, charged, as if it were carrying its own weight of anticipation. I tried to steady my breathing, focusing on the papers in front of me, yet I couldn't ignore how alive I felt under the brush of her presence. Her gaze was fixed on me at times, then flicked away to the folder in her hands, a small, almost imperceptible dance of attention. There was a gentleness in the way she handed me documents, her fingers brushing against mine, brief, fleeting, but enough to send a quiet jolt through me. That moment, though small, carried a tenderness that neither of us dared to name aloud. As she spoke, her voice was soft but confident, measured in a way that drew me in rather than simply conveyed information. It wasn't the content of her words that mattered most in those moments, but the cadence, the subtle pauses that allowed our eyes to meet and linger. There was a weight to the silences, a space where meaning existed without a single word being spoken. I found myself observing the small details, the way her hair caught the golden light, the faint line of concentration between her brows, the slow exhale as she leaned back in her chair. Every motion seemed deliberate, intimate, as if the world outside the office had vanished and we existed in a bubble of time just for us. There were moments when her hand would brush against mine again, this time unintentional, or so she claimed. Yet even in these fleeting touches, a subtle warmth lingered, the kind that makes you aware of your own heartbeat and the quiet longing that seems to rise unbidden in the chest. I felt a mixture of fascination and hesitation, aware of the professional boundaries yet drawn irresistibly into the gravity of her presence. The longer we sat in that softly lit room, the more the ordinary world fell away. Outside, the office buzzed with the distant sounds of phones and footsteps, but inside, there was only the quiet rhythm of our interaction. The air between us vibrated with unspoken questions, the kind that make you aware of possibility, of desire that is careful yet insistent. By the time she leaned forward to point at a document, her hand brushing against mine just long enough to make the moment linger, I realized that this meeting, whatever its original purpose, had become something far more personal. A quiet tension had settled, subtle and insistent, a delicate spark hovering between curiosity and longing. In that golden light, in that intimate stillness, I knew the evening would not be easily forgotten. The room felt suspended in a quiet, almost sacred space. The golden light from the dimmed office lamps softened the edges of reality, making the ordinary seem intimate and charged. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers idly tracing the rim of her coffee cup, and I noticed a subtle shift in her expression. A trace of nostalgia mingled with a flicker of vulnerability. "I don't often talk about this," she began softly, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to pull the world away from the room. "But there was a time years ago when I made a choice I still think about." I leaned forward slightly, drawn in, not just by curiosity but by the rare openness in her tone. The confident, composed exterior that defined her at work had melted just enough to reveal something human, fragile, and compelling. My heart stirred, not with desire yet, but with a deep, empathetic fascination. She recounted a moment from her past, something personal, perhaps a failure or a heartbreak, something that had shaped her into the poised woman sitting across from me. Her words were careful but infused with emotion, and I realized she trusted me with a piece of herself she had long kept private. I felt honored and simultaneously aware of the intimacy the office's quiet shadows now held. As she spoke, I couldn't help but notice the subtle physical cues, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gentle tilt of her head, and the slight pause before she exhaled, as if gathering courage to continue. There was a warmth in the room, an invisible thread connecting us through the shared space and the weight of her memories. I wanted to reach out, to offer some physical reassurance without overstepping, and so I let my hand brush lightly against the edge of her chair as I adjusted my position. It was a gesture so small, yet it carried an unspoken message. I was present. I was listening. I was here, not just as her employee, but as someone who valued her trust and vulnerability. The silence that followed her story was not empty. It vibrated with emotion, a quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted. The dynamic between us had subtly transformed. We were no longer just boss and subordinate, but two humans sharing a private, meaningful moment. I could feel the unspoken understanding in the room, the magnetic pull of mutual recognition, and a flicker of connection that neither of us dared name aloud. Her eyes met mine, soft and unguarded, and I realized that the tension between us had deepened, no longer just curiosity but a quiet, simmering intimacy. I wanted to speak, to offer comfort, but words felt inadequate. Instead, I let my gaze stay on hers, letting the shared silence speak the volume neither of us could yet articulate. By the time the memory had been fully shared, the office no longer felt like a workplace. It was a cocoon of warmth and quiet understanding, where vulnerability and trust intertwined. And in that golden light, I understood that this was more than a conversation. It was the first step toward a connection that could quietly change everything between us. The office seemed to breathe around us, quiet yet full of tension. Shadows from the dimmed lights stretched across the walls, and the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, wrapping the space in a warm, intimate cocoon. I felt aware of everything: the soft tick of the clock, the subtle hum of the air conditioner, the rhythm of my own heartbeat, as if the world outside had ceased to exist. We were discussing a report when it happened. Her hand moved to point at a line of text, and our fingers brushed. A small, almost accidental contact, but it sent an unexpected jolt through me. The warmth of her skin, the fleeting pressure, the brief alignment of our movements, all combined to make the ordinary act of reviewing a document feel profoundly intimate. She didn't pull away. I didn't either. For a suspended moment, time slowed. The air seemed heavier, charged with a quiet energy neither of us spoke aloud. My chest tightened, a fluttering mix of nervousness and fascination that I could hardly name. Her gaze met mine across the desk, steady and calm, yet with a flicker of something unspoken that made my pulse quicken. The professional barrier, which had always felt solid, now seemed porous, almost fragile. I could feel the tension between respect and desire, caution and curiosity, pulling at both of us in subtle, unspoken ways. Every small movement carried meaning. The way she adjusted her chair to lean closer to the papers, the quiet inhale as our hands lingered near each other, the way her eyes softened as she looked at me. I found myself acutely aware of her presence, the warmth radiating from her, the subtle sway of her hair as she moved, the gentle cadence of her voice that seemed to vibrate in the quiet room. Even as we returned to our work, the memory of that brief touch hovered, an invisible thread connecting us, fragile yet undeniable. In that moment, I realized how much our proximity mattered. A simple brush of hands could communicate what words could not. Attention, recognition, a mutual awareness of the silent pull between us. I felt a mix of exhilaration and hesitation. This was uncharted territory, an emotional space both thrilling and precarious. She spoke again, pointing out another detail, and once more, our hands neared each other. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay grounded, to maintain the professional veneer, even as the intimacy of our shared space made every action feel loaded with possibility. The sunlight, dimmed by the curtains, fell across her face in golden streaks, highlighting the subtle curve of her cheek, the quiet intensity in her eyes. It was mesmerizing. By the time the meeting continued, I understood that nothing would feel ordinary between us after this. The first touch had opened a door, small, tentative, yet impossible to ignore. It was a moment that lingered, charged with unspoken questions, restrained desire, and the delicate beginnings of trust and connection. And in the quiet cocoon of her office, I felt the slow, undeniable pull of something deeper forming, a bond that neither time nor propriety could easily erase. The office had grown quieter still, as if the shadows themselves were listening. The golden light filtered softly through the curtains, painting her features with a warmth that made the room feel suspended in time. There was a vulnerability in her posture tonight, a subtle shift in the curve of her shoulders, a delicate hesitation in her gestures, that drew me in more than any spoken words could. She looked at me directly, her gaze steady but layered with unspoken emotions. "I don't usually share this," she said, her voice low, almost confessional. "But I feel like I can with you." I leaned forward slightly, trying to make space for her words without rushing them. My pulse had picked up, a mixture of anticipation and curiosity, but more than that, there was a quiet reverence for the trust she was offering. She was opening a door, a private part of herself, and I felt the gravity of that gift. She spoke of the pressure of leadership, of moments of loneliness in her personal life, of the small joys and disappointments that shaped her days. Her voice trembled slightly at times, a subtle vulnerability that made my chest tighten. It was different from the confident, composed persona she carried in meetings and in public. This was human, fragile, and profoundly real. As she shared, I noticed how the light played across her hands as they rested on the desk. I shifted my chair imperceptibly closer, careful not to intrude, yet wanting to be present. to show with body language that I was fully there with her. My hand hovered near hers, aware of the warmth radiating from her skin, the subtle rhythm of her movements, the small, intimate spaces where connection could exist without a word. When she paused, I spoke gently, choosing my words with care. "I admire you," I said, "not just as a boss, but as someone who carries so much with grace. I feel drawn to you." Her eyes softened, and a fleeting smile tugged at her lips. She exhaled slowly, a breath that seemed to carry relief, acknowledgement, and something deeper, an unspoken understanding of the tension that had been building between us. "I feel it too," she admitted, her tone almost a whisper. "It's unexpected, and it scares me, but I can't ignore it." The room was still yet electric. Every small gesture, our shoulders leaning slightly closer, the way our knees brushed under the desk, the quiet cadence of our breathing, amplified the intensity of the moment. It was an intimacy that transcended words, a subtle acknowledgement of mutual desire tempered by respect and restraint. I realized then that confession wasn't just about spoken admission. It was in the way we listened, the way we observed, the quiet acknowledgement of shared feelings. In that softly lit office, we had crossed a threshold, not into something reckless, but into a space of trust, understanding, and emotional vulnerability that neither of us could forget. By the time we returned to reviewing the documents, the air between us had shifted irreversibly. There was a delicate tension, tempered by warmth, that lingered in every glance, every gesture. And in that quiet, golden light, I knew that our connection was no longer just professional. It had become something profoundly personal, a slow-burning spark that neither time nor propriety could easily extinguish. The office had grown quieter than ever, the golden light from the curtains casting long, intimate shadows across the room. Every small sound, the rustle of papers, the faint hum of the air conditioner, seemed magnified, each carrying weight and meaning. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my senses attuned to her every movement, every subtle shift in expression. We were sitting across from each other, reviewing the last of the reports, but the usual rhythm of office work had been replaced by an invisible tension, a magnetic pull neither of us could deny. Her fingers lingered near mine on the desk, just shy of contact, creating a quiet ache that I could feel in my chest. Every brush of her sleeve, every glance, was amplified in the hush of the room, and I realized how acutely aware I had become of her presence. And then it happened. My phone buzzed, a reminder from the office system, a mundane interruption that felt jarring in the cocoon of intimacy we had created. She glanced toward the sound, a flash of hesitation crossing her features. I could see the conflict in her eyes, professionalism versus desire, caution versus curiosity. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. The room seemed suspended in time. I wanted to close the gap between us, to reach across the desk, but the awareness of boundaries, the age difference, the workplace hierarchy held me back. She, too, seemed caught in the same tension, her fingers brushing against the desk just enough to send a quiet current through me, a reminder of the spark that had been building for hours. Her eyes met mine, steady and searching, and in that gaze, I felt the weight of unspoken questions. Could we cross this line without regret? Could a single touch, a lingering glance, a shared breath, change everything, or would it shatter the fragile balance we had been cultivating? I exhaled slowly, matching her rhythm, letting the silence speak for us. She leaned forward just slightly, her shoulder brushing mine under the desk. A brief, charged contact that was both daring and restrained. It was a simple gesture, but in it lay everything: desire, hesitation, longing, and respect. I felt the warmth of her, the subtle pressure of proximity, and the undeniable pull of connection that neither of us could ignore. The choice hung in the air like a delicate thread. Neither of us moved to fully cross the line, yet the acknowledgement of possibility was electric. The tension was no longer just curiosity. It had become a quiet, intimate decision to recognize the spark without letting it consume us recklessly. By the time the interruption faded, the phone silenced, the office noises receding, the moment had passed, but its echo remained. Our hands lingered near each other, our glances were heavier, our breathing more synchronized. The professional world still awaited us beyond the curtains, but within this small, golden-lit room, something profound had shifted. We had made a choice not to act impulsively, but to honor the connection we shared, to let it grow slowly, carefully, with awareness and mutual respect. In that quiet office, I realized that desire did not need to be reckless to be real. Sometimes, the most powerful connections are those that simmer just beneath the surface, waiting patiently for the right moment to bloom. The evening light had softened even further, slipping through the curtains in thin, golden slivers that danced across her office floor. The room, once filled with the nervous energy of anticipation and unspoken tension, now felt gentle and quiet, as if the shadows themselves were holding their breath in reverence to the fragile closeness that had grown between us. We were seated across from each other, documents long since set aside, the formalities of work giving way to something far more intimate. Her eyes met mine, warm and steady, carrying the weight of everything that had transpired in the last hours. The shared stories, the brief touches, the confessions that had lingered between us like threads of light in a dim room. She smiled softly, a gesture that held more meaning than words ever could. "This evening," she said, her voice calm but tinged with quiet emotion, "has been unexpected, in a way I didn't realize I needed." I felt a rush of warmth in my chest, a mixture of relief, admiration, and something tenderly romantic. "Neither did I admitted, my voice low, "but I'm glad that we could share it." There was a pause, a quiet space heavy with the intimacy of trust and unspoken desire. Then, slowly, naturally, she reached across the desk, placing her hand lightly on my shoulder. It was gentle, deliberate, and entirely unhurried. The warmth of her touch was grounding, a physical acknowledgement of the emotional connection that had formed between us. I felt my own hand hover near hers for a moment, almost instinctively, before letting it rest on my lap, letting the gesture speak for itself. We lingered in that quiet, suspended space, sharing the warmth of proximity without urgency or expectation. There was no need for dramatic declarations or overt actions. The meaning was in the subtlety, the steady heartbeat of closeness, the way her eyes softened when they met mine, the tiny curve of her lips, the faint scent of her perfume that clung to the room. Eventually, she leaned back, a contented sigh escaping her lips, as if both relieved and comforted by the shared understanding. "We'll figure out how to navigate this," she said softly, her tone practical yet tender. "But tonight, let's just be here, like this." I nodded, feeling a quiet smile tug at my lips. There was a sense of completion in the air, a soft resolution that did not need loud words or dramatic gestures. We had crossed the invisible boundary between professional and personal, not recklessly, but with care, respect, and emotional honesty. As I gathered my belongings to leave, she gave me one last look, a lingering glance that carried warmth, curiosity, and promise. The office door opened, letting in a sliver of evening light, and I stepped out, feeling the world outside had changed. The meeting, the confessions, the touches, the quiet silences. They would stay with me, resonating in memory long after the office lights were turned off. And in that quiet, golden moment, I realized something profound. The slow burn of our connection, nurtured carefully and with intention, had blossomed into a bond that was at once delicate, meaningful, and unforgettable. For the first time that evening, I felt a sense of hope, not just for the connection we had shared, but for the future moments we might carefully, beautifully create together. Sparkling heart, if this slow burn romance left your heart racing, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more stories of forbidden attraction and age gap connections. Share your thoughts in the comments. Who else felt the tension in that unforgettable meeting?